Well, I think both of those are really good advice. I'm going to talk about something even just so something a little bit different. Now, I agree completely that knowing the science is important, that being able to advocate your position is important, that really understanding what's big and what's not is important. You guys are going to have to work with people, and you're good. You're going to end up managing people. And you know what? Now, these three all have an advantage of me, I mean, that you guys also have, and that they've got masters in public health. Masters in public health includes some exposure to leadership, to management, to some of the things that you will have to do when you're working with people or people are working for you. Coming out of science school, they don't teach you any of that. Your job is to sit at the lab bench and mix things up and measure experiments and do stuff. Nobody tells you how to set a vision for something, how to organize people, how to do performance reviews. I mean, there are lots of things that sound very mundane, and they're a really important part of being able to do what you want to do. So I think you've got a real advantage already coming from the degrees that you have and the experience that you have in a place, in a school of public health like this. I'd urge you to consider, or to continue in your mind, take that part of the job seriously. It can sort of seem like the stuff that, you know, you don't want to think about it. You know, my scientist friends, you know, MBAs think about this stuff. I don't want to deal with those people. You know, that's a lot of smart people who spend a lot of time thinking about how to make an organization work well. And someday that's going to be something you're going to really care about. So remember to keep the skills that you can build at managing, organizing, and executing things, something that you continue to work on just as much as your science skills, your advocacy skills, and your insight.
Well, you know, I didn't know what to say until you said that.
And don't believe anything you say.
Yeah, no. So I can't remember the question either. But you know, there's like three things that I would say that are personal to me that I've struggled with facing a public health issue. One is empathy. You know, you can often lose that when you're looking at people who are different. And you know, one of the beauties of public health is that you get to see and talk and work with a lot of very different people. The other is judgment, and chiefly not having one, about people, because you can often confuse a public health problem with a social determinant public health problem with, you know, they just didn't take good care of themselves and they've got this issue or that issue and all this sort of thing, and then you judge them and put them in a, you know. Because oftentimes people in public health, I hope, generally have better health and understand what good health is and usually practice it, and not in every case, but in most cases. So you're coming as that kind of a person to groups that aren't so fortunate as you, that maybe weren't brought up like you were, et cetera, and it's a real struggle not to smoke, and it's a real struggle to have a good diet, and it's a real struggle not to engage in family violence and all. And so the idea of judging people in public health, to me, is something that I always have to remember to leave that somewhere else, because otherwise they're not going to help them, it's not going to help me and all that. And then the last thing that I have encountered, especially most recently, because I'm in an organization of, you know, 1,500 scientists, no personal slight intended, and when they try to communicate, it is like, what the hell are you trying to say here, you know? Is this even English? So the idea of communicating with populations that you are trying to help, it doesn't help them if you can't, you know, really reach them in what they're, and the level that they can understand, you know, whether it's a language or a dialect or pidgin or whatever. You've got to be able to communicate. You've got to be able to bring all your understanding and fancy science and bring it down and do it. And that's hard. Believe me, it's really hard for a lot of people not to do. That's why we have a whole, you know, battery of communication people to translate. But that's what I've learned, is that I've given some bang up presentations to people that I don't think they understood at all, frankly. I thought it was fabulous.
we're gonna open the floor to questions. Joanna's gonna be leading the discussion for this. So if you guys have any questions, feel free to ask the panelists.
Any questions right now?
So the panel seems very distinguished. Everyone has lots of acronyms.
Well, thank you. That's the impression we try to cultivate.
So do you recommend that people in this room also pursue a doctorate degree in addition to an MPH if you are leaving here with a master's?
I would say not necessarily so. It depends on what you want to do. EPA in particular, but also the state health department, my experience in California, a lot of people where the master's degree was a terminal degree, were engaged in all kinds of roles. I mean, in terms of everything from actually leading investigations. You'd think they wouldn't be leading scientific investigations, but they were often doing risk assessments, managing groups, and doing policy, doing legislative analyses, moving up in the federal government through the leadership ranks, many of them, to the highest levels of leadership. I think it's different in different agencies. I know in the FDA, I spent a lot of time there. If you don't have the doctor in front of your name, it's tough. Everybody, all the leadership has a doctor in front of their name, but it's kind of a medical agency. That's not true at EPA. It certainly wasn't true in public health. For the state, it's certainly not true in local agencies.
Yeah, I mean, I work in an organization which hires scientists, and terminal degree people have a certain, cachet. And we have a program where we actually take people who do not have one and pay for their education. So we're sort of locked into that. But I think that we have also a lot of people who have MPHs who have a lot of functionalities within the organization. They may not be leading a scientific research group, and so they don't have those roles. But so I think it depends on what you want to do. If you really want to be, when I was at MIT, there was a phrase called the tyranny of expertise. If you want to be that PhD and want to have that little area, no personal slide intended, that little area of toxicology where you are the expert, and nobody else knows as much as you, and you really want to focus on moving that field, forward, then yeah, you should get a PhD. But don't get a PhD because you feel like, you're naked without one, and you don't get a better job, and you won't get promoted. It has to be for the right reasons.
I mean, you have to be really interested in doing the kind of research that you have to do to get a PhD. I mean, if that's the bottom line. If it wouldn't be fun for you to do a dissertation, then don't do it. Because at the end of the day, it's always really hard. And, and it just isn't worth it for that.
But to circle back on what George said, if you want to work in, say, a federal, a non-research agency, not like that, but at OSHA or EPA, where people without doctorates are leading the most important projects in almost every case. Managing is actually very important, because the way you advance within the federal government is you have to be able to manage people. You could be the very, very top person, the expert in that area that you're working in, but if you don't manage the team that's working on that, you can't really get that increase.
It's management, and it's being able to see the bigger picture.
Yes, and leadership.
Being able to see
absolutely.
the bigger picture. So, in academia, when you leave your training, you go do a postdoc. To be successful, you focus on the smallest thing possible and do it at the greatest level of detail. Okay, don't just study hormones in the environment. Study one hormone. I heard that from somebody. In government, it is the very opposite. From the beginning, people who can see the bigger picture are valued. And so, if you're a big picture person, then, being in practice somehow, whether it's something like OSHA or EPA or public health or industry, is going to be a better place for you. But if you're interested in getting down into in a very in-depth view of a specific thing, then the university is better. And I've seen people who don't fit both ways. There was a guy in the state health department in California who was only interested in one disease. He was only interested in one disease. He was in communicable disease. And he was considered to be the most annoying, irritating person in the company. And he never moved up, even though he had wonderful credentials, lots of degrees, right? But he never moved up. And yet in a university setting, he would have been so valued because he was the world's expert about that disease, which, by the way, very few people had, which is another issue.
Well, you know, at NIOSH, we describe ourselves as a university without students, which a lot of people really like because they don't want to teach, and they often come to places like NIOSH to do their research, and they don't have to worry about students and stuff. But I'll tell you a story. When the first time when I had a division director that we had to hire, I ended up hiring somebody without a PhD. I thought the walls were going to collapse around that place because it was the first time that there was a division director without a PhD. But it was a division in which management, as you guys are saying, and which the relationship with stakeholders had more importance than the research area.
And it really isn't a dissertation on stakeholder relationships.
Any more questions?
So it seems like all of you have had a foot kind of planted in academia throughout your life, or you know, going back and forth between either government or other jobs and academia. Was that a conscious decision on your part, or did it it seemed like some of you could describe, well, this kind of just happened.
I thought I would never be in an academic position when I was your age. I'll just tell you, I mean, that was the furthest thing from my mind.
I thought I'd never be in government.
So,
I don't think either. Yeah, it's all serendipity.
Okay.
I mean, I got, because Lynn, who didn't know me, nominated me to this panel, I did some work with the Energy Department, and when the Assistant Secretary of Energy at the time decided she had enough of the job, and the White House asked her who to replace her, without telling me, she recommended me because I was able to handle really the science and the stakeholder issues, which were as complicated as the science on this panel.
more complicated.
Yes, exactly. Much more complicated. Yeah, the science you could figure out. The stakeholder stuff was tough. And that's how I ended up getting in government.
Well, I have a question, if I could ask. Is there any disadvantage to advocating too soon? And I guess more specifically, if we're fresh out of our MPHs, is there a disadvantage to going into, say, the nonprofit sector if we have a vision eventually of working for the government?
I don't think so.
Not at all.
No. I mean, I used to be 2 doors down from a professor at Hopkins, Helen Silbergeld, who started out as well, she did a postdoc at NIH after she finished, but then she worked for an advocacy group, and then she went to University of Maryland and became a faculty member. And for a while, she had her foot in both worlds. She was 50% supported by the advocacy group, 50% was a faculty member, and then eventually moved into fully being a professor. And there are people about her who would say, oh, she's an advocate, blah, blah, blah. So that does stick to her a little bit, but on the other hand, she's been incredibly successful as an academic. So.
And we try to hire people who are good at what they do. We hire people from industry and from unions and from NGOs. And this relates to all this pile of papers, it's tough to get a government job. And the higher you come in, people who know this are nodding their heads. It's difficult. I mean, the government hiring system is not one that functions well to begin with. And there are all sorts of preferences, and the applying online is a difficult process, if anyone's ever tried to. And often an agency will get hundreds of applicants, and then people who really have no great background in this will review and choose the top 3 or the top 6. And so getting in is can be very difficult, especially if you've been out for a few years and you're trying to get in at a higher than just an entry level.
You have to know the right words.
But
on the page.
But there are some fast tracks in, so I brought some materials on that. This one page, which doesn't have this label, but internship program. There are 3 programs that take people who have recently graduated from either undergraduate or graduate degrees, and they have a preference for getting in much more quickly. And so you have to move on that within a couple of years of graduation. But some of the best people who work for OSHA were what we call presidential management fellows. And it's a fabulous program.
And I'd like to put in a plug for the EIS program at CDC. You can do amazing things. We had a young woman who just joined us last year. She's now the deputy country director in Sierra Leone.
Wow.
In her first year out of EIS. So.
And these are also programs that you apply to and you get selected different ways. Like the Presidential Management Fellowship, you apply, but then they actually there's a whole day where you interact with everybody else, they see how you do in groups. I mean, really, it's a lot of the skills we're talking about. It's not just the fact that you have an MPH or a law degree, and they take people with all these different backgrounds. But they want to see how you can handle different situations. And then the agencies can just hire you. They don't have to go through all the preference. You can apply in the fall, and there are a couple other programs this year. The other thing is the Peace Corps. If you go into the Peace Corps, and obviously I'm not advocating you go into the Peace Corps to get a government job, but if that's the direction you're going, after your 2 years, you're also given preference for hiring, and you can be hired essentially as like an internal hire.
Is that what Vista do?
It does,
yes.
AmeriCorps, yes.
AmeriCorps,
But yes,
absolutely.
absolutely. And so those are great. It's really important to be aware of those, because if you're just applying with everybody else, it's not impossible at all. We hire new people on a regular basis, but it's just much more challenging for us and for you.
And, back to your question, NGO experience can help you when you're applying
Yes.
to a government job, because those people who read the applications are impressed by
That's right.
the years of experience. Honestly, sometimes they're impressed by things that you might not think are that important, but, because you have to think about who they are and what they're concerned about. And so if when you were in an NGO, you got to run something, lead something, supervise something, manage something, those terms mean something to them, even if the job is not a management job. Those kinds of words mean something to them, because that's what they are.
Right. Because they don't know the content at all, but they understand.
They understand these active verbs. Use active verbs.
Additional questions?
Do you have any other keywords that would?
There's got to be a website.
Analyze
Yeah.
is a good one, another good one. I will say that generally in government jobs, but in most jobs that are in female law and school public health, people are looking for analytic skills as well as communication skills. They're not expecting you to be ready to lead and start supervising people, but they are looking for somebody who would be pretty sharp about being handed something and being able to write something that is intelligent about what that means, and to learn how to communicate that in as few words as possible is very much valued. And, once you're outside of academia, the more.
Exactly. One of the things we do when we hire people at sort of a higher level and have some managerial requirements, we give them what we call the inbox exercise, where we invent a number of different things and put them in the inbox and give them an hour and say, okay, what are you going to do with these things? And you have to sort of be able to read things quickly and figure out, is it important that, your boss is calling, or your boss's boss, or CNN versus something, things are much less important. You've got to figure out what's important and what you're going to do. And some people, sort of figure it out pretty quickly, and some people just have no clue. And that sort of tells us a lot. And so if you have experience in NGO or things like that, you actually learn some of these things.
In an NGO, you can learn that. On the
Yeah.
Hill,
Right.
on the
It
Hill,
helps
you
both.
can learn that.
Absolutely.
It's and these internships, you
Yes,
can learn that too.
absolutely. Needless to say, OSHA is always looking for people. It is the path less traveled, in that most people in public health school who go into EOH departments are interested in the E rather than the O. But people move back and forth. We have people who've come from EPA and gone back to EPA once they're a Fed. A lot of the issues are very similar. So, if you're interested and you look on, what's it, usajobs.gov?
USA jobs.
I would be looking at all these different agencies. and without openings there.
I wanted to take advantage of that for a moment, given the fact that here sitting before us are the two most influential thought leaders when it comes to occupational health and regulation and also in research. So they really set the national agenda as to how this country responds to occupational health. And given the fact that in recent years there has been shrinking interest in occupational health, I wanted to hear from both of you as to how we can, what is your view for the future in terms of capacity building, in terms of person power trends? And we're not only talking about getting folks to go to OSHA or NIOSH per se, but other ways in which smart, dedicated, well-educated people such as are in this room can pursue paths and careers in
Well,
occupational health.
you've all studied this question.
Yeah, well, we did a big survey looking at person power needs for the profession. And we found a huge gap in many different areas professionally, nurses and doctors, industrial hygienists, safety engineers, about 25,000, minimum that are missing or will be missing over the next 10 years. So that's actually on our website. So if you'd like to go there, that would be something. Now convincing everybody who's might be interested in that is harder because it is as David said, the environment gets all the attention and the working environment doesn't get as much, and oftentimes people are a little turned off because it is a more tension-filled environment than the general environment with the fishies and the trees and the air. Our environment is just a little harsher sometimes because the workplace is an area where labor and management sometimes don't agree on these health issues. So it's pretty difficult.
But one of the things that John's study found was also that the expectation is these professional staff who are going to be hired are really multi-skilled more than ever before. Not just someone that has industrial hygiene background or safety background, but they can sort of do.
The idea of being interdisciplinary
Yeah.
when it comes to this broad area of environment as a big word, including all types of environment, I think is really important. So if you think you're a person that's trained more and interested more in the general outdoor environment or whatever, don't shy away from jobs that may not be that particular environment, be another kind of environment. And I'll mention one, not to frighten people, but the Department of Defense has a lot of the same issues that we deal with on the civilian side in both environment and in occupation. We work with the Undersecretary for Environment at the Department of Defense. When beryllium wafts over the fence, when the jet engines are too loud next to the school, all of these kinds of issues. They have industrial hygienists, safety engineers, environmental specialists that work. They even do research. There are several Department of Defense research agencies. We partner with a number in the nanotechnology area, for instance. We're trying to weaponize it, we're not, but nevertheless, we do a thing. So don't forget that. A lot of people get, I'm not going to work for, that DOD, but it's a big place. They have a lot of money, and they hire a lot of people like you. And so the final thing I'll say about that is, there's a world in which, in a school of public health, you may not realize that a particular NGO or particular government agency or a particular business or industry wants somebody like you, and it isn't a natural, it isn't a State Department of Health, for instance, but you'd be surprised where you find that your talents, the health talents, have some cachet, and that is something that you might look very broadly at too.
So that's a good thing, cachet, I like that.
Yeah.
But, we should put that on the
Well,
School of Public Health
the-
website.
yeah, the reason I mention is
You
because
come here and you will have cachet.
I work in the Department of Health and Human Services, and the whole emphasis now is on population health. Well, this is what this building is here.
Yeah.
And people are now actively, scholars, et cetera, and agencies in HHS, chiefly CMS, are trying to turn a medicalized Medicare program or Medicaid program into a population health program. That's what you guys are trained in. So I have seen more MPHs go in CMS to the Medicare program than I've actually seen come to our program. So the world is much bigger than we even think.
So I was thinking also, Melissa, about occupational health as a global health issue. And I think that there is the reality that many of the worker health problems that we think have been solved, because they aren't big problems in the United States today, are immense issues globally. Even asbestos, which is still a problem here, but it's a much larger problem.
Shipbreaking in India.
Shipbreaking, I had to work on that too. We share stories about shipbreaking, an enormous problem. And it goes on and on. Child labor, some of the work environments that children are involved with, or pregnant women with their little children in those environments. There are many opportunities to work on things globally that maybe we don't emphasize so much in the United States today, but need to be addressed.
I think that's a very good point. At CDC, we have a whole global health program. We have people in every country in the world, and they work on these population-based health issues. They're attached to embassies, they're health attaches, and they do work like that. We have now 345 people in West Africa from CDC. Over 90 of them are NIOSH people, for instance. So if you come to a large public health agency like that on the federal level, just graduating to MPH, become an EIS officer, you can do a lot of really interesting things.
I was wondering if you could describe any mentors you've had along the way, and if so, how did you keep those relationships strong throughout your career, and how did they help you along the way?
I mean, I have had several mentors along the way, and I can't say that the same people who were mentoring me at the beginning of my career still are today. Some of them remain very close friends. They're great friends. They're more friends now than mentors. And the funny thing that happens over a lifetime and a longer career is that what seems at the beginning of your career to be a big gap between you and that person, then over the years you kind of become colleagues, but those relationships are incredibly important, and I think one of the most important things to do is to not only kind of nurture them and maintain them, but in each new phase of your life to identify the people that you can connect with, and perhaps they mentor you, perhaps sometimes you're mentoring them. That also happens sometimes. You can have peers that are very important in providing you support. Even your fellow students are sometimes using mentors.
Something I'd suggest there that, Lynn's exactly right, that they change over time. And I've had sort of intellectual mentors and mentors more in career, and like, what are you going to do thing. But one of the things that I would suggest is being active in a professional community. A professional society, and ideally one, something like APHA is great, it's really big, but if there's something even a little smaller, that's how you stay in contact with. That's, you said you become colleagues with people who may have once been mentors, but you're active with a group of people who care about the same things you do, and you can build those relationships that are going to help you, perhaps in different areas where you need mentoring, and you're there to mentor somebody else if they need it.
Even APHA is really large, but the people who participate in the environmental health section or the occupational health section, that's a relatively small number of people. And you'd be surprised how close you can become to those people, the few dozen who really do the work, which is part of what I'm saying, is that part of that is, being one of those that really does the work.
And you get to know them, and they get to know you, and you really are part of that community.